Hi, this is Eva. I wasn't really wanting to do this. Um, I've had neuro fatigue the last couple of days, and it's kind of thrown me for a loop. I mean, I have it. Um, Usually, if I do too many activities in a row, like if I overstack my day, it's kind of like if people have migraines, so they kind of know what to do and not do, and you know, they kind of can prevent it by like not doing specific things. So usually mine is like that. And in case you don't know what that is, neural fatigue is basically exactly what it sounds like. People with traumatic brain injuries definitely have it. Um, I'm not sure about other neurological conditions, but I would imagine it probably crosses over. It basically is just like suddenly out of nowhere you're just completely like it's I always think of it as like a vampire gets you or something. Like all your energy is gone, like you just almost like collapse like a balloon running out of air. And there's really like nothing you can do about it. Like it's happened to me before when I was in rehab, and it would be like one minute I was just doing really well, and then the next minute it was like I couldn't keep my eyes open or function. Um, and I like try to hide it because insurance companies like they highly frown on that. If you have neural fatigue, it's like they want to cut you off because they think that you're not going to make a full recovery. But I always argued against that and just said it was a natural part of it. But that's neither here nor there. So the things I was going to talk about tonight, I think I'll turn this music off because I think it's distracting. I was going to talk about kind of broaden some of the things I talked about with schizophrenia last night. Oh, the music doesn't want to die. That's Hans Zimmer. I love him. Anyway, I was going to talk about some things leading into my mom's condition that I didn't bring up last time, that really kind of set the stage. I think like now in this day and age, especially when people have Google and there's just knowledge. I mean, there's like too much knowledge. But you see, when I was growing up, when I was a kid, especially in elementary school, like there was no information. Like my family would refuse to talk about my mom, except just the like, we were going to go see her, the kind of stuff. We didn't talk about her condition. And I I think it was really painful for my grandparents, and I also just think they were raised at a time where it was considered like against the family for you to label people, especially with like mental illness or addictions. Like it was like kind of taboo, almost like you're like dooming that person or cursing that person, you know, that there's no hope. So this caused a big issue in how I interpreted the whole experience with my mom. And the reason I'm talking about this is because I know it's cliche, but I mean, since I've been going through all this, growing up with a schizophrenic parent, there's honestly just, even with the internet and stuff, you'd be surprised. There's not a ton of information for children of schizophrenics. And, like when I have found information, it's like people from, all different kinds of experiences, but not necessarily the experience I had as an only child. So I just didn't have anything, like, I didn't have like a book to read, or I didn't have like a show to watch or anything where I could like, I didn't have a relative I could talk to. I didn't have any information about what the hell was going on. And this caused a huge, well, I'll tell you about it. What it did is it caused, it turned itself into its own self-fulfilling prophecy. So basically, I think I did find something, I don't know where, but something about, the percentages of children of schizophrenics and what were the chances of them getting it. And like, I know like nowadays there's been a lot of studies on twins, and like Oprah Winfrey did a big book about, I think his name's Wally Lamb, and it was really popular with the book club and nationally, and it was all about two twins who had schizophrenia, and one did really well and the other one was a mess, kind of. And there was also another study that got published. I think it got made into like some kind of network series, and it's about six siblings who, I want to say they all had schizophrenia, but they were also like, extremely gifted with music or different like academic things. I'm not sure, but I tend to like, some things about schizophrenia, I'm not really like down to watch it, it's just not my cup of tea. That's not gonna be good escapism for me, it's gonna be like just sitting with my past, and that doesn't sound very appealing. So the first instance I remember forming an idea of what was happening was when I think I was between 3 and 5, I'm not sure. And I was at my grandparents' house, and I was like in their bed, and I had the covers up, and I had been napping, and I could hear my family, not my parents, because at this time I was staying with my grandparents alone, and I think my uncle was over, but anyway, my mom wasn't there, and I looked just at the window, and in the window was, well, it was a witch, and I couldn't like make my body turn and look at it. I just would like look with my eyes, and like I feel like my grandmother and I had either we had watched it together, or somehow I had snuck and watched it at a friend's house. I don't know. The Wizard of Oz. So, there's the Wicked Witch, of course, and then there's the good one. Well, that Wicked one really, terrified me. I was definitely too young to have seen it. And I was like convinced that the witch in the window was that, what was she called? Something of the Wicked Witch of the West or East or something. I was convinced it was her, but like kind of like in a miniature version, like a little devil, but it was a witch. And I remember like I was afraid to breathe, and I got like the sleep paralysis where you like can't move, and I just was like trying to call out to my grandmother, and like uncle, and try to get someone to come upstairs and like get me out of that room, but it was like I couldn't speak. Like I guess like my throat was completely like, it felt like somebody was, like almost like strangling me, or like I couldn't talk. Like I was completely paralyzed in this, like my vocal cords. And I was just terrified. And in that moment, I realized that I honestly had transferred my fear of my mother, the times that I lived with her, visited with her. Like, I realized in that moment what I really thought was that she was in the window. And that just made me like 10 times more scared. I don't remember what happened out of that, if somebody finally ever came up or if I fell asleep. I don't know, but ever since I was a little girl, I was plagued by nightmares, and because I have PTSD now, especially from the robbery, I'm kind of used to. That's sad to say, but I honestly expect to have nightmares like 3 out of 7 nights, if not 4. Like, it's pretty common. I've gotten out of night terrors. I used to have those. But the whole point of this is that since I didn't know what mental illness was, I was convinced it was like she was a monster. That's what I really believed. I believed she was not human, and that she was either a witch or a devil. I wasn't sure which. And here's the thing, like, because I'd read that study that said if you had one or more parents who were mentally ill, I think it said I had like a 50% chance of becoming mentally ill myself, or schizophrenic, or whatever the book had said. I convinced myself, I was young, I was under 8 years old, so like I didn't really know how to interpret information that well when it applied to like a personal situation. And I decided, like, not decided, I just like took that in as like, basically every time I saw my mom, every single time, and spent time with her, I believed I was looking in a mirror. Like, I believed I was looking at my future. I believed, since I was the only child and both my parents had hallucinations, because my dad was, they called it some kind of depression back then. But it was, he was bipolar 1, and with hallucinations if he didn't take his medication. And then obviously my mom was paranoid schizophrenic, so I convinced myself that as soon as I grew up, like, I was going to be like her. And I think at some point I got the courage up to tell my grandmother, but my grandmother was just like, well, we were neither, her husband had mental illness, so it's like, and they had my mom, so like, that meant, it was random. But I think because I'd had that experience with her with the head injury, and then there was an earlier experience that I didn't talk about. I talked about the premature birth at home. I talked about that, but when I was, I want to say between 2 or 3, we were first living in Connecticut before we went to Florida, because my grandfather there had got, he had some real estate, and he, rentals that he rented out, and he let my parents live in one of them. I don't know if it was a duplex or a house, or if it was an apartment, but I remember being in the bathtub, and then the next thing I know, my dad was giving me a bath. He was taking buckets and like taking the water and trying to put out a fire. It was like my mom had like set the place on fire. I don't know if it was accidental or if it's something she meant to do. I have no idea. Like, nobody ever told me really what had happened, but I'd been with her at other times where she had like over flooded the bathtub to the point where it was like going on the apartment below, like going through their roof and stuff. Like, been through incidents like that. But so the fire destroyed it, the residence, and that's why we moved to Florida. So I've always had kind of like a serious fear of fire. Obviously, probably because of that. And so growing up, the way I saw my mom was almost like a timer, really. Like I was just gonna live my life until I became her. And like I had heard that it happened before she was 20, so I kind of thought, well, I have till then. And I feel like if I had known that, if someone had talked to me, or if I had had the information, if I had known more about, I guess, the real statistics about it, or if I just knew anything about mental illness at all, it would have helped me a lot to not take it all so personally, because the way I took it was more like I was kind of obsessed with fairy tales. And so my most scariest fairy tale were Snow White and the Hansel and Gretel. That was the one I really couldn't stand, because she put them in those cages or something in the basement, and then they had to poke out their fingers so she could feel them and see if they were fat enough for her to cook yet. And once they put a stick through, and then she felt that, and then she decided that they weren't, or something. I don't remember how it went, but somehow they escaped. I don't know, they tricked her. But I was terrified of Hansel and Gretel, and for some reason the whole Hansel and Gretel thing and the witch in Snow White and the one is it Maleficent and Snow White? No, Sleeping Beauty. I don't think her as much, but the other two, I was definitely like, that was the vibe I got from my mom. I just really thought she was not human, like from the underworld. And that's what I thought mental illness was. And my family was not religious. I mean, they did send me to Sunday school, but they didn't go in. And they would drop me off, and it's not like anybody put this in my head. It's just the only thing I could come up with, understanding what it was. But it did start me praying really, really young to God, because I was convinced that some kind of satanic thing was going on with her. And I could like always hear her talking and screaming and pacing around, and she was always smoking, and a lot of times she'd be smoking and the ash would be going all over me, and I would just be like stuck in the car with her in a seatbelt, and it would just be like nothing I could really do about it. And she would smoke those like female cigars, and it just really that weird clovey like smell, and the whole thing was just disturbing. But I was gonna do a little bit more with this, but just don't know if I can do it tonight. The other problem with neural fatigue is that basically it kind of makes you kind of stupider. Honestly, it doesn't make you as sharp. And that should probably go away by tomorrow, I would think. But that's I guess what I wanted to say about that, and then I'll tie it in with another video, and we'll talk about maybe the history of there's like a huge long history about people demonizing mental illness, of course, and then especially the church, big shocker. And you know, they considered schizophrenics as being possessed by the devil, and there was a lot of terrible misunderstandings that happened with that, where obviously like people who were severely mentally ill and they didn't have medication back then would be, you know, killed or, you know, tied up or locked up against their will. Okay, bye.